Hello and welcome back to another Code Cyclone tutorial. Today we're going to go over scripting our first weapon and modifying that script so we can shoot a couple different ways. So let's go and get right into it. We're going to need to open our GS game file. So I've done that here. And we need to add a default properties block. And inside that properties block, which you can define just as default properties, one word, and curly braces to give it a scope, default inventory at index 0 is going to be equal to a class or a instance of the class gswep_pistol. Now I know you guys haven't seen this file before, but that's because we're going to make it right now. So let's go ahead and just do that real quick and save it, and let's move on. Now define a new file, or create a new file that is, called class gswep_pistol, and let's extend it from UT_weapon. And this is the basic weapon that all the Unreal Tournament stuff is extended from, and it's a good little place to start. It's got a bunch of functions that are already defined and play in with the player controller very nicely for us. Alright, so let's go ahead and start. We have a couple functions here that I've left in, and just so you guys know that I pretty much took the shock rifle and cleared it out of all the extra stuff that they added in, Epic that is, for the Unreal Tournament game. So we are left with these few things, and that's where a lot of these default properties come from. So if you are doing this on your own and not downloading our source, that's where I got all these values from, aside from the custom ones we put in. But you can always download it from codecyclone.com. Just look in the tutorial section for this video and you'll find the link right under the video. Alright, so when talking about weapons when using UT_weapon, we have a few functions we want to keep track of. First off, we got projectile fire. It returns a projectile, which is the one you shot, and all it does is just spawn and initialize that projectile and send it off. And this is where we're going to be overriding a lot of our functionalities right here. Similarly, you got insta-fire, or instant fire rather, and what that does is that spawns an instant fire trace. Or I shouldn't say spawn, it calculates a trace from your starting from the barrel of the gun straight out to the effective range, of course, and then we'll determine if you hit something, and if you did, you know, it'll return where, and then that's how you calculate what was hit and damage and all that fun stuff. But we're not actually going to override much in there, so we're just going to call it the super version of it, which effectively you actually don't even need this block, but just so you guys can see it, it's there. This fella here, instant fire start trace, what this does is it's going to return the physical location to start from. I'm not sure if UT_weapon actually had an instance of this, and I didn't think to look, but I left it in there just in case. You don't have to really worry about it right now. This we'll deal with later. Let's go ahead and get into our default properties. So I've defined all the default properties for you and given them a comment so you can see what each of them do. And a lot of them are self-explanatory, like fire interval is the interval in which the gun can fire. So, you know, for the primary fire, which is index 0, it's 1 second per shot. You know, your instant hit damage for primary fire and your damage type and all that stuff. I mean, you can go through these and it'll really just be self-explanatory. Just a couple, though, that you want to be aware of is right here. Weapon fire types and whatever index you're at. Now, this can be one of two things. It can be projectile or instant hit, and I've defined both of those right here. You can see them where my cursor is. Those are the two values that it can be. I'm sure Unreal has some other ones in there, but for guns, this is what is commonly used. And that will determine if your gun shoots as a projectile or as an instant hit type weapon. And what's cool about that is that you can define variables for instant hit and make this a projectile and it'll never use it. You know, it won't even care. It just will do whatever it wants to do. So that way, if you ever decide to change it, the value is already there. You just switch out this variable for, you know, projectile, or the opposite, you know. And then if you're using projectiles, similarly, you can also define them with weapon projectiles in the index to whatever projectile we want, which we're going to get to in just a second. And so that way, in case you go from instant to projectile, or you are projectile, it will automatically use it and not cost you anything. We'll get into the sniping properties in just a little bit, so we'll come back to that. But the last thing we want to look at is the attachment class. And that, if you have to think of an attachment class for weapons, think of it kind of like it's kind of a replication thing. I know we haven't covered replication yet, but replication in a nutshell is just a series of attributes you can apply to something in order for it to replicate across the network. That way, for internet games, everything shows up. An attachment class is really just used for handling the third-person view and replicating all the stuff that should be shown to everybody else and yourself if you're a third-person camera, of course. We're first-person, so that doesn't really matter to us, but it matters to whoever else is playing our game with us. They need to see what we're holding, or else it wouldn't be very fair. Alright. Just for the heck of it, the very last thing, first-person mesh. This is just your skeletal mesh, just like any other property block. You just switch these out with whatever your mesh is and your animation set and all that fun stuff. That's it for this one. Let's go ahead and move on. So we're going to go to the attachment class, and we called it GS attachment underscore pistol, and it's extending UT weapon attachment. And what we're going to do here is define our weapon class so that it knows where to pull variables from as far as shooting rates and all that stuff, so you can reference itself. The animation type, which is how your character is going to look, at least in UT anyways, with the animation tree they define. And it can be a pistol, default, whatever. Since we're using the shock rifle, it's a rifle, so I put it as default, which is the rifle stance with the right hand on the pistol grip that is, and the left hand on the forward. I guess they would just call it a foregrip. I don't know exactly. There's a term for the shock rifles area. And then of course you can define the third-person mesh here as well. And then you have a couple different things here that are just effects. You got muzzle flash and your bullet whipping sound. Not a big deal. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the projectile. The projectile is going to extend UT projectile, which is again the base projectile for Unreal. We're going to set its damage, which is the equivalent of, if you go back to the pistol, the instant hit damage. Same idea, but since the projectile is its own object, it keeps the damage to itself. The damage radius is how far out that damage will hit, so in our case we're using a bullet, and bullets don't really explode, so we're keeping that there. Again, you define the damage class, which we're going to get to finally in just a sec, and then some variables related to velocity. We got the speed of the projectile, the max speed, and the acceleration rate. Momentum transfer, think of it like being hit. The harder the punch, the farther you go kind of deal. Momentum, the higher it is, the farther your player will go when they're hit with that projectile. And you got some sound and some other stuff that you guys can look into. Again, all these are inherited from, this is actually the Link Guns projectile, with some rocket launcher stuff mixed in it as well, just to sound a little better. So no biggie there. And then finally our damage type, and this literally is the Link Gun damage type, just name switch, because right now we don't really have any of this stuff to line up to anyways. The only thing you need to do is make sure it's lined up to your pistol. Right there. Alright, and pending you have all this done, and all these files are created and placed inside your game folder, which, if you don't remember, it's CUDK, whatever your year and month build was, development, source, generic shooter, classes, and then you'll find all your files in there. So let's go ahead and give this a run. We're going to start this puppy up and see what we get. Alright, that's so far so good, and everything compiled just right. Just so you guys, so we can talk about it real quick before it gets moving, the first thing we should see when this loads up is that we'll have our gun, because we set the default inventory, for our guy to have it. And the second thing will be that our character will be able to shoot the primary fire of instant hit type, and projectile fire will be the secondary fire. And what we're going to do after that is start changing the way these things run and getting into a couple of different attributes of weapons so that we can make some really cool custom features. Let's go ahead and load this up, set our game mode, set our map to hallway, start our game up, yada yada. Alright, as you see, we got our shock rifle here. We click, it does the instant fire. I've removed the effects, that's why we don't see the beam, but it is there. And then of course if we do alt fire, we have a projectile, and it's nice where it should be. Alright. Well, good. So everything's working so far. Now let's go ahead and do something fun, because no one likes boring guns. Alright. If we load up and go back to our pistol, let's go ahead and make the primary fire a projectile type by just switching out its fire type. And let's go back up to projectile fire. Now, two things we want to do today is we want to make a bursting weapon and a spread weapon. Spread weapons are like a shotgun. They have a wide cone of fire. And a bursting weapon, well, you know what a bursting weapon is. It shoots in repetitive motion with a little bit of delay. It's not quite automatic, so to speak. It has like a halting period. So let's go ahead and do that. Now consider the code for, let's do bursting first. We're going to add a function into here. We're going to call it burst. And we're going to say if the current burst is less than the max burst, go ahead and fire, increment it, and then run it again. And we're going to need two variables for that, which we will put up here. We're going to call it max bursts and current bursts. So we have however many we want to go to and which one we're at now. And let's go ahead and split this up just so we can see what we're doing. We'll say if current fire mode is equal to 0, so if it's the primary fire, else if it's equal to 1. And then if all else fails, we'll just do a single shot. So we'll do burst up here. So we'll define current burst as 0, we'll make it run 3 times, and let's actually increase this frequency. We'll say every half second. Every half second we'll set off a shot. And then sequentially, let's go ahead and get our spread. Push that in there. Now all this is doing actually I didn't want to double that. We're going to make this 0. Actually, I think that might be backwards. I think I might need to make that 1, but that's alright. And then we're going to need a variable in here to run that loop. So we'll define I. And all this is doing is we're setting our spread open so that it has a good, shotgun-like effect. And we're going to define a for loop that shoots or does 0 to 8 projectiles. So we shoot them almost all at once. There's a little bit of a delay between them, but it's so close most users won't know the difference. It'll practically look the same. So we got this. Okay. Everything seems to be in order. We got, just to recap, we got our current fire mode, which is the current mode we're in, either 0 or 1, primary or secondary, or alt fire if you want to call it that. If it's 0, it's the primary, then we're good to go, and it's going to be setting a timer for half a second. It's not going to repeat, and it's going to call burst, which if you looked over here, burst, if it's able to burst, it'll fire, and then it'll increment your burst and set the timer again. And if it isn't, it'll just kill itself. And then if it's the alternate fire, we're going to do a spread of 0.15, which is a decent spread, and then fire off 0 to 8 projectiles. So 8 projectiles. And then we're going to set the spread back to 0, that way we don't mess it up. Although I guess now that I think about it, we can actually toss that, because it's going to be the same no matter what. Alright. So we're in here, and let's go ahead and compile this just to see what we got. And it compiled good. Well, let's see. Oh, we're almost actually out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to end the video here, and when I do the second part of this, we'll see what these did, and we'll go ahead and go into making a sniper, and then do some more advanced stuff with the sniper rifles. So stay tuned for the next one.